Welcome to Rooted to Thrive, conversations to elevate our humanity. I'm your host, Rochelle Peterson Ansari, Professor P for short. This is your podcast sanctuary for cultivating mindsets and skills to elevate our shared humanity. We're taking a deep dive into practical strategies to evolve as anti-racist, culturally competent, and inclusive individuals and leaders. In each episode, we're bringing you real-world examples and actionable takeaways. We're going to talk about personal growth, fostering connection, and creating positive change that dismantles systemic barriers and creates environments where all of us are valued, empowered, and activate our collective power. This is Rooted to Thrive. Welcome and welcome back to everyone joining us for Rooted to Thrive, Conversations to Elevate Our Humanity podcast. Today, we have Doctora Erica Davila. She's a professor at Lewis University in Illinois, right outside of Chi-Town, Chicago. She's now I'm getting ready to embarrass her. She's an award-winning expert in her field in education, and she's a luminary. You hear me, folks? A luminary for anti-racism.
You just started, you're going to make me cry
I
already.
know, listen, I felt it myself. I was like, wait.
Luminary, I'm going to take it.
For anti-racist, culturally competent education. Listen, you are in for a treat to get to know Erica. Now, what's more important is that I've known her for almost 20 years now. We became friends after meeting as colleagues when she joined Arcadia University. She joined the faculty there. I think that was her first post. And I was an administrator at the time, right? Over the years, we locked arms to fight oppression in education. We created courses together. We mentored students together. We created service learning courses for undergraduates. We took students abroad together. We developed college curriculum for graduate students and even college readiness curriculum for our middle school and high school girls. But most importantly, we became family. So Erica, I am so honored to have your beautiful soul, your trailblazing soul joining me today to just share only a small slice of the love and light that you've shared with me and countless others over the years. How are you doing, Doctora?
I'm doing great, especially now after your words that mean so much to me. But I'm feeling great. We have, some nice summer weather in Chi-Town.
Yeah.
Always missing Philly, my second home.
Yes.
So yeah, super excited for this conversation. I definitely feel like this will be in the archives, y'all.
Mm. That's what's up. Yeah, I love it. I love it. I love it. I am so excited for you to be able to share on the topic that you chose today, right? And that was like rooted in community, family, funds of knowledge, and fighting oppression in education, even though we're fighting it everywhere, right? But education for sure. And, we often tell people to honor the funds of knowledge from our students and their families and colleagues in the workplace. But many people struggle to go beyond fun, food, and festivals. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Yes. And so on Rooted to Thrive, because we are rooted, culturally rooted to thrive, we were created to thrive. We have so much more to bring to the educational institutions that weren't built for us, right? And so I would like you to get started, right? We're talking about elevating humanity here. So I wanted you to get started by just sharing what it means to you to be rooted in community and how that elevates humanity.
Ooh, that is a big question. But I do love that question, especially because of the two parts,
Okay.
right? Like thinking about what it means to elevate humanity, just that thought alone, I feel like is the antithesis of what we're seeing, at least in I would just say the US of A. I'll
Yeah.
just call it out, right? It's really
Yes.
hard for me to talk about this phenomenon, even though I know it's a global phenomenon, but I'm saying in my nation state, my lived experience, what we're seeing is that complete opposite for so many of our people. I was one of these folks who, really thought about like success in this very like white American way for like a hot minute.
Mm,
And as I go through, right, like academia and grow up in academia, it's like almost every day, right, getting messages where it's like that is not a real thing. And what I mean is that like, that success thing. So coming back, right, to this thing about being rooted in community, it's really hard to know who your community is sometimes, I would argue, until you really need them, or they really need you. There is this kind of thing that happens, right, around our humanity of um, making ourselves vulnerable as humans in whatever way, shape, or form. And then I will talk about it specifically as what it means to be vulnerable as a human who lives in this body, right?
mhm,
As a Puerto Rican woman, as a single woman, all these, as an academic, right? Like, because it is very specific across context, but there's this, I would argue, even universal thing, right? Around what does it mean to honor our humanity?
mm,
So growing up again in academia, like I started my first full-time appointment, as you mentioned, at Arcadia outside of Philadelphia. I was not yet 30. So now, hitting 50 soon, right? Like I'm like, damn, like you think about what does that mean, right? As far as the space that has shown me in this kind of twisted way what really matters,
mm,
period. Right? What really matters. And it's not that climb up, right? It's not that number of publications and even awards, right? Even though I was very humbled, specifically at the community that honored me, right? Which I'll talk about later. But all that to say, right, back to the rooted in community, I have like my ride or die is my mom.
mhm,
And I've seen her fight this world like day in and day out. And basically seeing that, like her and her being makes me understand that like her evaluation of me and her assessment of me will always mean more than the annual assessment, the tenure, by the way, which I've been awarded twice, the
yeah.
going up for associate check twice, going up for
Yes.
pool check, all that
Right.
on the scale of mom doesn't hold up.
Doesn't compare.
So
I hear you.
how could I not be rooted in community?
Mm,
Right? It's when I say community, I mean all of that. Like it's in the crib,
mhm,
it's not the old school, like next door neighbor all the time, right? It's communities that we choose, sometimes across borders of all sorts, right? That we're choosing to be in community with, we're choosing to go to bat with, we're
mhm,
choosing to love,
mm,
right? That's a choice when it's hard to love those folks. And I've been blessed to be part of some of these communities outside of my familial, right? Because I did lift up mom, but I have a father who I respect and love. We have a complicated story, a lovely story. He's like my superhero today, right now, and that's what matters. My brother, who I love to pieces, we grew up like, how they say, like we grew up like this. My nephews, who I love to pieces, like all these people are part of that family community, Rochelle, chosen family, all my primas and primos, my aunts, my uncles, all of that, right? Again, if I said all that stuff in academia, just mom on the scale. Now imagine this family, right? With all its beautiful branches and all their chosen family, right? Breaking this norm of this household, right? Of man and woman, right? Because God
mhm,
forbid people even start to think, of same-sex households or whatever, right? Like this image we have is static. It's like we can't move past this heterosexual family with 2.5 kids, right?
mhm,
Like it's like it's there. It's like a record. And if it's in our heads, like imagine folks, right, who don't have those communities, right? That kind of show us another way, right? We show us another way. How to love our people, good, bad, and ugly, right? How to challenge our people. That's something I've actually learned from Rochelle in the most beautiful way. How to stand firm in what we believe and understand or negotiate, navigate, whatever the word is,
Mhm.
how to deal with those contradictions,
Mhm.
right? So what I was saying about the family and like how we move and how I move in my professional space because of them, all of that shows me what is my reality and what I value in order for me to know what I don't,
Mm.
right? And
Ooh.
so there's those moments where I'm like, "Ooh, it ain't, this isn't it, you know?" Um, I think I'm gonna stop there because I could keep going on the question, but
Yes.
there's just so many layers to what it means, I guess, to be rooted in community in that effort, right? To
The
center
L.
around family.
Yes. So I don't know. I heard so many things in what you said so far. I heard that even, your first family, your first community is your that nuclear group that you were raised in the household with. And you were raised in academia, right? We all are partially raised by those who teach us in schools,
Absolutely.
right? Schools and colleges, universities, professional schools. But you said like the story sounded like it began with buying in to things like the supremacy of whiteness and the way we were supposed to show up in the world. But somehow I wonder if that really was the beginning, because as you say, you were rooted,
Hmm.
right, by community. You said we don't know them until we might not know many of those communities we have until we need them. Of course, as children, we needed our
Hmm.
parents, right? Like just, in our own development. So I wondered first and foremost in maybe elevating or maintaining your humanity, what are those funds of knowledge that
Hmm.
you have leaned on? That's the
Hmm.
question. And then those you talked about knowing what you value.
Hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. So a couple things. When I reflected on that, like I said, for a moment, like buying into it, right? And I think it's hard depending on what spaces you're in, right? Where that is not just the norm, but again, it's what's valued. So, like for myself, I was blessed to go to Chicago Public Schools, kindergarten through 12th grade. And because now I know it was because my mom fought to keep me in those spaces because I went to the same school, K-8, and then same school for high school. And then I went to our it's no longer considered commuter because they have some resident halls, but our local university, Northeastern Illinois University. I went there for 5 years and I still live not with my folks, but in and around Chicago, mostly with a former partner. And then I moved to Champaign with said partner, Champaign-Urbana, to go to U of I for grad school. And I would say that moment, a lot of people will call it, I don't want to say a life changing. It was more of like a lens, like it put a lens on things. And it's predominantly white university was my first time in a predominantly white educational space, which I had not thought about. I had not reflected on that. But luckily, I had a sociology major. So I was a sociology and elementary ed major. And I always say that that marriage, that's my only marriage, y'all. Sociology education together launched me into my grad studies, right? Like I came from that space. I think it would have been very different if I had just one or the other. So now I'm talking more, right, like this academic side of the house and how that informed. And there were moments in that space that both affirmed me incredibly, made me think about my family because I had some amazing critical scholars. That's where I was introduced to critical race studies. Chicana feminist epistemology, all of these things that were made by our people. I'm like, these people are brilliant, right? These are our people. This is our space. So I was like, okay, but then, right, being in that space, and I was also a middle school teacher there. I taught fifth grade. It was a lot going on with my identity in that moment, right? Like a lot going on. And by the way, this was literally the cusp. I started graduate school in January of 2000. So there's also that like kind of like global moment, right, of shift, into the new millennium. So it was like all this happening, um, but over and over again. My mom was there in her own ways. She showed up. She didn't understand what I was doing. She has an eighth grade education. When I told her I was leaving my teaching job to finish grad school full time, she's like, what do you mean you have health insurance?
Yeah.
Like, what do
Yeah.
you mean you're leaving the job, right? So
Yeah.
just again, with it being so much of what she, I wouldn't say didn't understand, um, I would just say that it just wasn't part of her lived reality, right? Like she just didn't have any context for it, but she continued to support me and still to this day, but it was very hard for her.
Yes.
As a Puerto Rican mama, that was the age where she's like, where are my grandbabies? Where are the babies? And so it was a negotiation, I would argue,
Mm,
in our relationship. And like a lot of mother-daughter relationships, it's complicated. People would never guess that know me now and know her, and they know she's my bestie. I'm always with her. That we didn't speak for like 4 months, of course, over a boy, y'all. So it's over a boy. But again, those are the moments, right? Like you don't plan for those moments. You don't plan for heartbreak and cancer. Fuck cancer, by the way. You don't plan. Oh, I didn't ask you if I could swear. Lord have
that's
mercy. Uh, sorry. So I would say it's those moments,
Mhm,
um, domestic, abuse, dealing with folks in your family who are locked up, like those big moments, right? In the moment, the house is on fire. You're like, it's on fire, y'all, but we over, right? We just keep it going. And we have those moments where, you're just in that like stable moment, I would argue, right? Where you have to like take it for what it's for. And it's in those moments, right, that I'm like, okay, my community actually cares how I'm doing,
mhm,
how I'm feeling, how I'm living, not just the obvious, physical health, mental health, but like, are you good? Are you happy? Are
mm,
you thriving? Right? Like they actually care, right? Those kind of institutional spaces, it's all about measurement in ways that doesn't value that, right? So like you could be hella successful in most careers and be miserable, right? Like you could be depressed. We see it every day,
mhm,
right? We see it every day. And so it's like, how do we um value and honor those folks who, and I have to say this part in Spanish, tienen mucha paciencia. They have patience, y'all,
implication.
because that is a thing. That is a virtue, like patience.
Mm,
And actually, so I teach at a Catholic university. Maybe that's why the Catholic guilt, when I drop the F-bomb. Um, and I've learned a lot. I'm coming onto my 10th year there, which is crazy.
yes.
But 10 years at Arcadia, now 10 years at Lewis, or coming into my 10th year. Um, and I've learned a lot, of course, in both spaces. But one of the things they asked me very early on, it was probably like year 2 or 3. So we have Christian brothers who live on campus, and they do these talks, like monthly talks on the virtues of, Lassallean pedagogy and thought. And so they asked me to come give a talk on the virtue of patience. And I was like, oh, okay. Like it's just interesting to like have those moments where you see that people see you, right? And
Wait,
so I know I've been talking a lot
yeah.
about how I haven't been seen, not in the ways of with my family, but there are those moments, right? Because then people might be like, well, why do you even stay, right? I stay for my students, but that's a whole other conversation. But those moments of affirmation, and being able to sit there in front of a religious clergy and like, again, I'm the girl from Chicago that drops F-bomb, so it's like I have to negotiate all those identities.
Yeah.
But I'm there and I'm thinking and I'm like, this is beautiful. Like I
Mm,
really
mm.
felt like I was um engaging with them in this really like philosophical conversation around patience.
Yes.
It was really
Yes.
amazing.
Well, what I heard through and through, all that you shared, is that a fund we bring into spaces that may not have been created with us in mind are um, relationship, defining community, defining our work in the world as spaces where we care for others. It feels grounded spiritually to me, actually. Um, that's a place that I come from, right? That one part of my armor in spaces that people have felt unseen, mistreated, and validated was the fact that I was from a young age, I think as early as 20, I felt like I was created for a purpose
Mm,
that was uh, to work with and on behalf of, right, advocate for people who were historically marginalized in
yeah.
educational spaces specifically, right? Now, even though we had similar uh, undergraduate paths, I actually did. Well, you double majored, right?
Hmm.
I was a sociology major, but minored in education
Mm,
because I didn't want to be a teacher.
right.
I knew something that I don't know what it was, but I was like, I don't think I want to do that, right?
Hmm.
I wanted to educate, but not be a teacher. We probably
Hmm.
need to,
Hmm.
deconstruct that one
Yeah,
day.
you wanted to focus on education and not schooling.
Schooling, right?
That's what
Exactly.
I would think, right? Yeah.
Yes. And maybe it was the credentialing and certification processes. But what I did, I went in actually thinking I'm going to learn what children need developmentally, um, really from an educational standpoint, because I thought I needed it
Mm,
more from a space of, rescue from some trauma that I experienced when I look back on it, right?
yeah.
I remember saying aloud, I'm going to learn how to raise a child right
Mm,
from the education I was getting.
mm,
So,
yes.
we had the common trajectory in undergrad, and some of our, professional experiences as well. This how we approach our work seems very grounded in what individuals taught us, like what we caught
Mm,
from our communities versus what we were taught.
hmm.
Would that be accurate? Like, am I hearing you, accurately?
Oh,
That,
absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
those
Yes.
relationships.
I, yes, those tools or funds.
Yes.
Yeah.
What I'm
Yes.
also hearing is that even though, right, this LaSallian institution or other institutions of higher education may not have been built with you in mind, where you connected was
Hmm.
through relationship.
Absolutely.
Yes. People seeing even things about you that you didn't see for yourself. That's why we need the community in
Yes.
some ways, right? Like when we talk about implicit bias, right? These terms that a lot of people are throwing around, like we cannot see in our blind spots. It's a blind spot,
Absolutely. Yes.
the bad and the ugly.
Hmm.
But that was inspiring to know that other people helped you even see your
Right.
patience. And you said paciencia? Is that how you
Paciencia. Yeah.
conciencia, right?
Paciencia. It has like a different connotation in Spanish.
Okay,
I
please.
feel like, yeah, like patience, I feel like in the English, like US English, it's almost like the word tolerance.
Ah,
Like we use it in such a negative way usually, right? Like this, like, oh, you just have to be more patient because there's
mhm,
something wrong with that
mhm.
person.
Mm,
right? Or those
yeah.
people, right? Where in Spanish, it's more of like a caring thing, like
Yes.
tener paciencia, yes, there's moments where it has that deficit swing or whatever, depending on the context. But when I hear it, I hear something different. And one thing I didn't say that was a big part of growing up was that I was in bilingual education, even though I
Yeah.
was born and raised in Chicago. And to me, that's important. I didn't realize it. But now, as a scholar of education who kind of like has done some work in language, like it's just amazing to me to think um how um how the school system, I will say, because I don't think it's any individual, you know, focuses on what we don't have.
Mm,
This
yes. Deficit.
this moment, right, where they evaluated um my English, period, right? They didn't care about my, it's like you don't speak enough English, so you're in bilingual ed. They did me a favor, by the way, because sometimes that happens, right? Where something that was meant to not work for you or center you does end up, right? Because the Lord is good. So I was put in transitional bilingual education around early 1980s, right? And so again, as a researcher going back and looking at from that side, you're like, oh damn, like they was playing with us, y'all. But I ended up being in a all pretty much Latinx space from kindergarten through third grade. And it's interesting because my brother went to pre-K in the same school,
Mhm.
and he's 2 years older than me, right? So in the school where the pre-K was, we would pass it every day to go to the cafeteria, and they had lockers. So I
Mm,
remember when I started kindergarten, of course, I'm like, I get my locker. No, we just had cubbies because it was in a different building. It was like a whole thing. So I remember being like jelly, right? Like I didn't get the locker, Danny got the locker, right? And it was because he did pre-K and I didn't do pre-K.
uh,
And so, long story short, I'm pretty sure now that I understand ed policy, and that was my master's and doctorate was in ed policy. Like I understand that the reason I was in bilingual ed or
mhm,
transitional bilingual ed, because there's a difference, was because I didn't do pre-K, right? Because me and my
mhm,
brother grew up, like I was saying, like this, right? So we had pretty much the same language skills.
mhm.
Um, and so it's interesting to think, right? Like how those trajectories work for children and how we can inform families and our communities if we do have that insight from being inside the institutions, academy, whatever, and
Right.
how you talk to your, person, at the crib, at church, wherever, the
Yeah.
grocery store, whatever, like,
Yes.
if you
Yes.
put them in pre-K, that is depending on what your child needs, right? I'm just giving you a very concrete example.
Yes.
But what I was starting to say was, right, being in that space, especially what I know now about those early years,
Yes.
right? So from about age 5 to about 8, 9 years old,
Mhm.
right? Like I had teachers that looked like me, talk like me, smell like me, y'all. Be like, you had some microphone, well, like we
Right.
had this initial, right, back to relationships, right? So you have this
Mhm.
initial shared experience,
Yes.
right? And not knowing, right, that the
Mhm.
reason we're having it is because of this lack of understanding of our emergent bilingual selves, right? Like what would have been dope is if they invested in my Spanish and my English, but
Right.
instead it was like literally felt like not physically, because I was blessed not to be like corporal punishment,
Mhm.
but it felt like the Spanish was beaten out of us metaphorically. But my
Mm.
mama's story is different because they hit them back in those, like, not say they don't anymore. There's a whole complicated story. But what I'm saying is that her generation, it was a very like overt,
Yeah.
right? Like beating the Spanish out of folks in a I would argue a more accelerated and aggressive way, where in the
Mhm.
80s, we were just before kind of the crazy conservative wave we had, which crushed that program. It revitalized, but that's a story for another day. So I was blessed, and I recognize this back to being rooted in community, right? There's people who fought for that. Like right now, my research is on the Chicago Young Lords, who they fought for bilingual ed, right? So it's not like I just came in and they were like, oh, we're gonna teach. No, it was like people fought for me to have
Mhm.
those 3 years, right?
Yes.
Instead of just come in, learn English, or adios, you know,
Yeah. Right.
it was like, it was something, right? They fought for something, you know, and without that fight, I wouldn't have had those amazing Latina educators, all women, Puerto Rican, Venezuelan, Mexican, like I had those teachers, right, in those early grades, which meant so much. I had no clue, you know.
What a wonderful note to end part one of two episodes featuring Dr. Erica Davila and our conversation about being rooted in community and family. Thank you for listening and come back for part two with Dr. Davila in our next episode on Rooted to Thrive.